Hi, my name is Marios and I'm an assistant psychologist at the Private Therapy Clinic in London. You can find all my social media links, including YouTube channel, in the description box. Today we're talking about internal family systems, or IFS, which is a type of psychotherapy. This model was developed by Richard Schwartz in the 1980s. He is a faculty at the Harvard Medical School, and it is a method that takes a systemic approach to personality where personalities are compartmentalized into more discrete objects within the mind, and the therapy addresses issues that a client might have by speaking to those individual parts. Those parts are actually around the self, which is a separate thing, and these personalities that are outside the self develop their own, not just their own characters, but also their own purposes. They are made in order to protect the individual. And so psychological distress and disorder, according to this modality, is a result of a kind of conflict between the parts themselves, or between the self and the parts. And so the way to remedy this is to start to address those conflicts. So let's start with the basics. What is a part? So a part is a concrete sub-personality that occurs within the mind. Keep in mind, in this modality, having voices internally or saying things like, a part of me feels this way, or something inside me told me this, or I was acting beside myself, it was something took hold of me, are all expressions of the model's kind of core idea, which is that we all have sub-personalities within us, and then the self is in the center of that. So you are actually a collection of the self and those other parts. So when it comes to addressing things, what might happen? So what you'll want to do is start to think about, well, which part or which sub-personality is coming up when I'm having these problems. For example, I get very angry when someone disrespects me while I'm driving or whatever. Suddenly I get into this mode of rage. I start shouting, I start swearing, I start beeping, honking, you know, speed up to catch up with that person, to yell at them or whatever it is. Now, I might calm down afterwards and think that was a bit extreme, or that didn't feel like me, or I know that something comes over me when someone does that. If you were going through IFS type therapy, what might happen is you would say, what part of you is being expressed at that time? What is coming forward when you're being disrespected in that setting? And so you might start to explore what thoughts are happening in that moment. I'm completely without control to kind of influence this situation, and they've just taken it upon themselves to cut me off. And now that's it. And all I can do is sit here and be angry. And then you dig a bit deeper. So it sounds like a part of you is really angry. It sounds like a part of you is hurt by the fact that this stranger is cutting you off. And then you start to really uncover, well, what are the traits that make up this sub-personality? And so that sub-personality won't just exist for that purpose. It might, but it will most likely be, you know, reactive to a series of other things in your life. You know, your partner not listening to you, you might get similarly angry. A waiter not giving you attention, again, that kind of thing. And so all these things will depend on your own experience, and when a part of you had to develop a sub-personality in order to address these unknowns in life, or this lack of fairness in life, or abuse and trauma, and you develop some sort of shield using this personality, this sub-personality. And really, another tenet of this approach is that the parts are not bad, even though they are having an expression that might be counterproductive and might not be, you know, what you would choose to react in an ideal world. They are actually trying to help you. They're trying to protect you against something that's happened to you previously. And so the whole point here is to, one, address the part and to just see it for what it is and speak to it. And this is something that might feel a bit strange at first, is that you will actually kind of be having a conversation in your head, but it's interesting to try. So what will happen is you will start to develop this inner dialogue. And when you start to think of it less as like a whole personality inside me, which a lot of people might find a bit scary or just very unknown, is just to think there's a part of me that's angry. Most people would say that's okay to say, and it doesn't feel strange. But take it a step further and say, part of me is angry in this situation. What does that part want? What is that part saying? And so you start to gain some familiarity with it. So when you do this exploration, the positive is that the part starts to feel acknowledged. which is one of those main things that cause conflict and therefore disorder under this model. If you are rejecting of subpersonalities or parts, we'll call them parts from now on. That's the name for the subpersonalities in this model. If you are hostile towards your parts, you know, you begrudge them, you don't like that you have these habits, you blame them, oh, that's who I am when I'm drunk and I hate that part of me or that side of me. This is who I am when I'm feeling a bit lonely and I don't like that I react that way. That disdain is felt by the part, and so that part feels guilty, or, you know, feels like there is conflict with you, and yet it has positive intentions. And so it feels like, well, you're not acknowledging me for the good that I'm doing, and so this conflict strengthens and actually it creates more harm. What should be done here, or at least what this modality suggests, is that you develop a friendship, like a kinship with your parts, and you say, right, I'm going to acknowledge that you're hurt, I'm going to acknowledge that you have these features about you and that you come up in these instances to help me, and I don't want to change you. That's another thing that's really important, is not to come in with the expectation to change the part. If you come in and say, I'm coming in to destroy my road rage part, my angry, disrespected part, that is just creating more conflict, which we just spoke about. So what you want to do is come in and say, I'd like to see this part for what it is. I want to connect with this part and be present with it. And how will that happen? You'll actually feel it in not just in a mental way, like thoughts and phrases that you might feel this part is expressing to you, or you might think it's you speaking, but actually might be the part. What you'll start to realize is that you might feel it in your body. Heaviness, lightness, tingling, anything really that might show that it's present. So when you become taken by this part, shall we say, or that part is very present, you might say, or when I get really sad, I feel a lot of coldness in my hands or something. That is the part being present. And so when you start to develop a relationship with, or at least a connection with this part, you need to start to acknowledge these different ways that it's communicating with you and say, okay, I feel it in my hands. I feel loneliness in my hands. I'm having memories of this element of my childhood, or this specific memory in my childhood. And I feel like there's a presence, maybe like a presence to my left, and it's very small and shrunken or something like that. So you start to develop a holistic view of the state that you are in when that part is present. So then what? Then you start to actually work with the part to say things like, what are you here to do? Now remember, not all these steps will be possible in the first session. If you're seeing an internal family systems practitioner, it's likely that you're going to start just familiarizing yourself with the parts first, and then start to get into the deeper, you know, what are you, what's your purpose, why are you protecting me, what are you protecting me from, etc. So especially if you're trying this by yourself, I mean, look into the methodology a bit more before you start practicing, just to get more familiar. I'll put up a picture of the book that the person who established this approach has written that might be useful for you. It's called No Bad Parts, and it's a good book to start with for sure. And so a dialogue comes after you've established the presence of the part. You just have to see it for what it is. What is already there. Don't try to change it. Don't try to give it, don't try to intellectualize its purpose. Let it speak for itself. And then you start saying, right, well, now that I acknowledge that you're here, thank you for being here, thank you for protecting me, I'd like to learn more about you. What is it you're protecting me against? And you might hear, you know, again, another thought, a memory, a feeling, a body sensation. All these signals are things you should be taking into consideration when getting in touch with the part. Then once you learn a bit more, it will probably tell you something like, I'm protecting another part of you. And so we won't go into this too much because it's probably for another video, but there are protector parts and hurt parts. For the purposes of this video, we'll keep it to those two. So a protector part is one that has developed the purpose of protecting another part of yourself. A hurt part is one that has been hurt by something that you've experienced in the past. And so this is kind of why, in theory, why these parts are created in the first place, is that something in your environment, something in your experience has created a hurt part. And so you feel damaged, you feel vulnerable, you feel unable to protect yourself from the rest of the world. And so another part is created in order to sit in between the world and that hurt part, and more deeply yourself. And so when you create all these layers, you can start to see, well, each part has its own agenda. They are all trying to protect something, try and push away something, try and pull in something. And the more you create a network of parts, the more complicated it then becomes that you create harmony amongst them, right? So you want to create a direct relationship with the part and then understand, right, well, what's your connection with everything else? And how can we work together? Because we all want the good life, the good kind of experience and progress. But along the way, because of your experiences and your ways of dealing with your life, you've developed defense mechanisms that are counterproductive, which can take form in these parts. So once you've peeled back the layers a little bit, you'll start to realize, oh, you know what? I felt really lonely as a child, and I felt a lack of power to connect with other people. And, you know, this developed into a hurt part from back then. And that the traits of that hurt part will be very different, for example, than the angry one that I mentioned earlier. But you'll see how it's kind of like an internal parent is created. That's, I think, why the title internal family systems was developed, because it is kind of like a family. The parts inside you are trying to create a family that protects each other, the parents and the children. And so a powerful protector part is one that's there in order to protect a more vulnerable hurt part. And so you can see how a good parent would be protecting a vulnerable child always. And so your mind is kind of designed to do the same thing for yourself. And that's why it splits into these sub-personalities. Now, before you get too worried about this idea of a split mind, the idea here is that it's completely normal for your personality to have many facets. So you think of a diamond has many angles that you can look at it from that look unique and refract light in different ways. That's kind of what is happening here. But they connect with each other in a specific way. They've been created for a purpose, and ultimately that is to protect you, the self. Which is a topic for another video. What is the self versus what is the part? The point here is stop treating those internal voices as foreign or bad, but also don't think of them so much as you. They don't completely summarize you. You're not a jealous or suspicious person always. There's just certain instances where you start to feel these feelings and you say, a part of me is feeling jealous right now. A part of me is feeling suspicious now. And that might be two different parts. That might be one part expressing itself in two ways. But the point here is you can say it is part of me, but it's not the whole me. And it's okay to interact with those parts of yourself as if they were their own personalities. And so giving them that autonomy as well helps them express what they're actually there for. Because if you start to think, well, this is me, then it's actually quite difficult to create a dialogue and expression, because you're just thinking it's me, but actually there are so many parts trying to speak at the same time that you will never be able to connect with the true point or the true purpose that this part was made for. And so the first thing to do is to create that distance and to say, this is a part of me, there's a part of me that is jealous. And then you say, become curious, what is this part? What does it feel like? It feels like, you know, a tension in my legs, or it feels like a dizziness in the front of my face. And those kinds of things will start to make you think, right, well, I'm the observer, I'm the self, and then this part is a separate being, kind of, in your own mind. And then you can say, I would like to understand you, please speak to me. And then this is where this dialogue begins. So it's a very interesting methodology. I do suggest you look it up. And if you are looking for therapy, you can, of course, look for somebody who has a speciality in IFS. Make sure, if you are struggling in any way, that you don't just try exercises at home, that you actually reach out. And so, of course, we can set you up with someone at the private therapy clinic if that's of interest to you. So look after yourself. Thank you.